Good morning, everybody. Oh, having to reset some things up. I was going to try and redo my broadcast setup yesterday, but I got caught up doing too many other things. So spent the entire day basically in East Texas doing some stuff, and I'm a little behind schedule. So I'm gonna be trying doing that tonight. So Monday may look a little different. I gotta, and the reason I gotta do it is I have to try and uh change some things because I have to have a green screen for the Tuesday show now. So I got to reset. I need to move this down a little bit so it's a little bit more directly at me and bring the camera closer. So Monday, everything should look a little different. You can probably see if that helps with the light a little bit. There we are. So it'll be fun. I got to replay all this, and I got to set up my pop-up green screen in such a way that actually the camera takes it all in. So having it be a little bit closer is going to be helpful on that. So all the little ongoings behind the scenes. Trying to think if there's anything new and important. Hey, Daniela, howdy. So let's in MH 1953, we'll give everyone a few more minutes to hop in. Danielle, I hope you're feeling better. So hope they're getting everything figured out for you. So just as a quick update on her, she is still in the hospital for the moment, but they're working. They're going to get her back up and running. So she'll be off and running around and getting all kinds of trouble again real soon. Yes, Danielle, exactly. Susan Robertson, hello. Trying to think if there's any other news. Bobby. We'll be at the Bob, you're going with us to Jefferson this year, right? That was my understanding, is that you, Randy, Tex, and I will be there. So we can schedule you another lovely day at the Oyo Hotel, because we know how much you loved that the last time. Yeah, no, I'm just going to Marshall. They got nothing but hotels in Marshall. It's 15 minutes away. There's just no reason to be at the Oyo Hotel. I'm sorry. 15 minutes is not a hard drive when you want to get somewhere. So no, I'm staying in Marshall. Good morning, Titan. It's like everyone's hopping in. So today we are, man, I have not been sleeping well. I don't know what's going on. What's it? Okay, so Marshall has a pottery store. What is there something special at the pottery barn in Marshall that I should be looking for? Just out of curiosity. I haven't been sleeping well. I don't know what it is, but I'm down another 5 pounds, so working on that. Everything, last little sort of intermediary checkup said everything was actually doing very well. So I've got a doctor's appointment on Monday. I guess they're gonna do like the full blood draw and all that. So we'll see how things are going. But yeah, down under 5 pounds. I'm usually able to get in around 2.5 to 3 miles on average a day, per day. Some have been over 4. So, we're getting there. If I can keep up, my plan is to try and keep this up for at least another 100 pounds or more. But I got to start putting in the weights again, building up the muscle mass. It's the muscle that burns fat. So, we're getting there. I think that's really it as far as the news goes. I mean, world's on fire. Not really news to anybody, I don't think. So, again, nothing that we haven't already talked about. I may do a couple. I mentioned they throw their own pots, planters, mixing bowls, and seconds really cheap. It has been about two. Oh, okay. That's cool. I don't know if I'll have time, unfortunately, since we are, we're there to showcase and stuff. I don't know if I'll get a chance to swing by, but I'll I'll see if I have the opportunity, I'll swing through. Um, so here's the thing. I just have not been able to sleep. Here's the thing. My wife has a unique and eclectic aesthetic sense. Like pottery, not really her thing. I mean, she it just isn't. Um, so, but maybe one of these days I will take her and she can take a look at it and see what she likes. So let's see if there's anything that strikes her eyes. But Image 53. I would like to stop making you yawn, but I gotta wake up. Hold on. Dropping my headphones. Hold on. Seriously, this is terrible. I need caffeine. This is terrible. I feel like there was something I wanted to talk to y'all about. Oh well. It is what it is. So change from time. Yeah, Titan, I think that's it. And I think like yesterday I was so busy. We were just out doing things. I didn't get to really do all my walking and working out and all that other stuff. And my brain won't shut off sometimes if I haven't, been doing a lot of artwork and writing. So, it is. So anyway, yeah. So today we're going to talk about we're really going to get into the wisdom books that we were supposed to do last week, but we just ended up talking about all the other stuff. So yeah, today we'll actually get into the into the wisdom books of Baruch. It's called the wisdom. It's sometimes just called wisdom, and it was Baruch wisdom. Hold on, I had to write it down because I always, how bad I am with names. Yeah, in Sirach. Also, so here's the thing. Like the problem is sometimes a lot of these books have multiple names, right? Like particularly the apocryphal books. So it's so wisdom is what it's usually written as, but it's also known as the wisdom of Solomon. It's separate, from the stuff in the official or in the accepted Old Testament. It's sort of a separate thing. You have Sirach, but it's also known as Ecclesiasticus. That's why I couldn't remember what it was called. And then Baruch. So these are the wisdom books. And they are going, and again, they're part of the Apocrypha. And because they're, I mean, to call them wisdom books is, it's accurate. I really couldn't, they really are just the books of wisdom, but it does feel like it's lesser. However, I think the real importance of them is going to be the references in the New Testament. You'll start to see what I mean about their wisdom books, but they're a little bit more than that. And we'll talk about Solomon specifically here in a minute. Just one of those things. So let's open with some prayer. Monday. I'll be sending Alan donations on Monday. So if you have an extra $5 or $10 you want to throw at him, PayPal's in the thing. Just PayPal me, make certain it says for Alan, and I will get it sent off on Monday. Cover the charges and fees and stuff. So the election they had that he was really worried about, or not worried, it was concerned important. Apparently they've had to go to the Supreme Court, so they're still working that out. Sound awfully familiar. So yeah, it is what it is. You know what it is? Sirupapers. I'm gonna start doing I'm trying to, the big things, Revelation and the 12 alignment. I'm gonna be trying to do some experimentation on how to record the Revelation 12 thing, so you can see it visually. But in the meantime, while I figure that stuff out, I'm going to be doing some more. It's going to sound political, but it's not really. It's showcasing the world that we live in. short 5-10 minute videos. Like, for example, everyone's kind of in some response videos when people are like just saying stupid things. I mean, honestly, legitimately stupid things. Um, but like the whole debt forgiveness thing for the student loans, everyone seems to be missing the obvious thing here. Everyone's focused on, well, what about those who paid for college, or like me, we worked and we saved up and we paid for everything, so we didn't have loans. We chose state school. We worked hard to get, it's like people are focused on that. What they need to focus on is, if this goes through, all those people who are drowning in student debt, they're about to get $10,000 or $20,000 worth of debt reimbursement or debt forgiveness. That debt forgiveness is taxable. They're coming for you. It's all he did is instead of paying the banks back, you're going to be paying the government the taxes on it. It's a tax grab. That's all it is. So, like, we're going to talk about that and just point out that the war, because the one thing I've really come to is politics, religion, and psychology. These are all the same thing. They really are. They are much more interconnected than we realize. Like, so if there's one theme we've been going through on Front Porch, that entire channel, is how interconnected everything really is. Like, these are not distinctly different things like we often imagine them to be. They are basically the same thing. And they are ultimately very, very connected. But again, we've talked about that on this channel, right? The spirits over the nations. Like, this is not these are not coincidences. The spirits over the nations, the control these spirits have over the people who are still plugged into that system. Like, you can't really separate these two thoughts. Again, we've talked about this with the Moms of Miracles. So much of what people would call, sorry, my green screen is bothering me. It's leaning up against my leg here. Let me move this over. It's a green screen in a bag. That's how high tech I am. Anyway, there seems to be such a connection between deliverance ministries and psychology, right? Like, because that's one of the things I was looking at. It's like, why are a lot of, like, there's the exorcism, right? Exorcism, things like that. But then there's that sort of verbalizing of continual thoughts, right? And it's like, you to fall out of agreement with things, and you're like, well, why would that? If that feels more like psychology, like you're deprogramming somebody. Hold on, let me try something here. My camera's acting weird. I think it may be the light coming in from the window. Let me see if that helps at all. It's like, it seems so much like that's a it feels very much like it's deprogramming. Well, it is. That's the point. And I think this is something that we often miss. Is, I'm just going to play with things for a second here. Yeah. See, the problem is the camera's wide. I wish I could narrow it in a little bit or bring it more into focus. So anyway, and the problem is, it's not a problem. The thing is, it is psychological, because I do think that I think we often have this very firm, bold line between psychology and the supernatural, or what happens in our mind versus what happens in our spirit. And I don't think they're actually as different as one would imagine. And we start seeing that overlap. We need to address that overlap. Honestly, mental health in the community is, I'm going to be honest, I'm seeing a lot of people with some real issues. And they didn't seem to have these issues to start off with. I think there is, I mean, obviously you've noticed we've talked a lot about things like MK Ultra and disinformation, ideological subversion. That's not by accident. I think at some point we need to realize a lot of this stuff is much more connected than we realize, and we need to really re-examine some things. I was just listening to, I came across, yeah, I'm on TikTok, and I'm probably going to convert that channel on TikTok back into like a Siru thing so I can do updates. But it, there was, it was, and the fact that it's the end of the world when you start quoting people like Tia Tequila. I like that. This is the world we live in. That's so nuts that people like, who was it? Oh, it was like 2 years ago. Lil Wayne. Lil Wayne said some things, and I was like, "Why is he making sense? Why is he making a lot of sense?" It's the end of the world, man. It is. Again, not immediately. We got some years, but when Tia Tequila starts saying stuff, you're like that hits a little too hard. You're like, man, this is not a good sign. So one thing she was talking, so she was on this little TikTok. She was talking about. She said, people are asking her why she sort of fell off a little bit. She goes, "Look, I get rid of all my contracts." She goes, "Here's the problem. You get too big and you say the wrong thing, people show up. They get you full of drugs. They remind you that you've got money you have to make, and that involves not saying certain things." And basically, she flat out said that she even used the words the MK Ultra. It's like you can tell whenever these celebrities have these mental breakdowns. She flat out said that's MK Ultra breaking down. She goes, whenever they start, they start saying that, they stop saying certain things and they start talking. Now, I don't think it's everyone, but I was thinking back to, yeah, Russell Brand. Thank you, MH1953. Yeah, Russell Brand. Russell Brand's been making like way too much sense. And you're like, okay, why? How is the guy from Get Him to the Greek making sense? I mean, about everything. Like, it's nuts. It's the world we live in now. But I was thinking about Britney Spears. And give me a second on this one. So growing up, it was a joke. It really was. But I was a fan of Britney Spears. Her first album was, I think, very, very solid. But like, it became a joke. People would get me like, they bought me for my birthday like posters and a calendar and all this. And I'm like, okay. I mean, I have a soft spot for bubblegum pop. I really do. We don't even have that anymore. It's all trash. But anyway, looking back at her life, many, many years ago, very publicly said, again, way before these channels and stuff, I was like, hey, we all owe Britney, like when she had that mental breakdown and she shaved her head and all that, I'm like, guys, we owe her an apology. Like, we did this. I started realizing how, I mean, I'd heard about it, but it really sort of stood out to me. It's like, because I watched her, like, she married that one guy for like 2 weeks, and essentially, like, this was a guy that she known her own, um, uh, it was a guy she'd known like her whole life, right? And she marries this guy for like 2 days or a week or whatever, and her parents and her court and the company that basically runs them had that annulled. Like, she broke after that, and for the longest time, I thought it was a combination of she realized she couldn't have her own life and the pressure of living every single day on the camera, right in front of everybody. Like, that's a lot of pressure for any human being to endure on a psychological note. So I thought that's what it was. But now looking back and some of the things that have happened, I'm like, I'm not saying she was strapped into a chair, right? And the way we imagine MK Ultra is, but is the breakdown that she's having essentially because she was programmed to be a pop star by Disney? Like, again, look at these Disney kids, right? I think we imagine, again, Hollywood has programmed us to imagine things to be one way. It doesn't mean that's what it is, right? Again, the whole MK Ultra thing, that was the crew. We're 40 years removed from 50 years removed from the official end of that, right? Hold on. 64, and we know it was going on to the 70s. So that would, yeah, so yeah, it's 55 years. I mean, the simple fact of the matter is it's been going on for so long. A lot of this stuff has been integrated into, because these psychologists all went to work for advertising agencies, these large corporations, and they have been using this stuff behind the scenes. So again, I don't think she was strapped into a chair and like they put drops in her eyes and they, all the stuff that you see in movies, right? I don't think that's what it was. But they've learned how to turn these kids into commodities, and how to suppress a lot of the trauma of what they've done to these kids sexually. So I'm really starting to worry that a lot of this stuff is also being used. Again, forget the drug stuff, but just the stuff they can do in the mass media, right? That stuff is being used on us, and particularly those in this community. And I think it's at a certain point we need to start talking about the mental health issue on this, and how to, it's breaking people. I'm watching people break, and it's terrible. So we're going to be talking about a lot of that on Siru, while I'm working on like how to do Revelation, how to do the timeline, Genesis 6, like what's the timeline for the Nephilim, that kind of thing. So yeah, I guess that's the only update. Image 1953 has a great point, and yes, yeah, those 87,000. Well, not all of them are going to be gun-toting accountants, but yeah, we'll talk about that in a second too. She goes, personally, I think we aren't hardwired to be super rich or super famous. It's not a natural state of being, and you're absolutely true. It's not what God intended. You're absolutely right. We're not. In fact, we are supposed to be in a loving community where people are held accountable, like publicly. And so where there's a tight knit of people, community of people who actually care about you. That's what families are for. And that there are people, the elderly are supposed to be the ones sort of like those who are older, who have earned over decades respect for their behavior. Those are the people we should be looking up to, the people who are actually accomplished. But they shouldn't be unaccountable either. And they shouldn't have so much money that they can just influence everything. So it is what it is. Hey, Chad. So yeah, I mean, we're these poor kids are being tortured by these companies, and it's all for entertainment. So yeah, we're going to be talking a lot about that. Anyway, so let's open with prayer, and then we'll start talking about again the wisdom books, which we were supposed to get into last week. Yeah, Titan. Actually, yeah, same thing. Yeah, exactly. There's some weird stuff going on. So, Heavenly Father, we thank you and we praise you for all that you've done. Father, we ask that you would guide us continually in your word and in your presence, that you would allow our hearts and minds to seek out those in pain, those that you've called us to. Father, give us the strength and the courage to speak when the world says no. Heavenly Father, give us the compassion not to begin to hate our enemies, but rather to continue to pray for them, understand that they are themselves deceived, that they are ultimately victims, even though they are perpetrators as well. And Father, we proclaim your coming, knowing that it will rectify these things and that evil will be punished. Father, help us never to lose compassion for those in need, and give us the strength not to be conformed to this world. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Hey, Lisa, welcome back. Been a while. Glad to see you. So, again, today we're going to talk about the wisdom books, because we're going through our review of the books of the Apocrypha, right? And so again, this week we're doing sort of I'm clumping all the wisdom books together, because again, they are wisdom books, and that's pretty much the easiest way of looking at them, but there's some context to them. And one of the first things I want to address is, because again, this is an often used argument, is that, the books of the Apocrypha are not referenced or quoted in the New Testament or by the New Testament authors. Well, we've had that conversation, but I really want to drive home how influential these books were, right? These wisdom books were to the New Testament. So in fact, let me put this link if y'all want to take a look at it yourself. I'm putting it in the chat. It's actually it's an interesting one. I went ahead and shared it with Nathan Hoffman, because we're both working on these quotes, and it's like, oh, well, hey, of course the Catholics are going to have this as a reference point, right? Because they've been studying them longer. They didn't reject them in the 1860s like the British Bible Society did. So let me just run through a bunch of them. And these are just the references in, again, the Wisdom of Solomon, aka Wisdom, Sirach, aka Ecclesiasticus, and Baruch. Matthew 2:16, Matthew 6:19 through 20. That one's from Tobit. Matthew 7:16 and 20. That's Judith, and that one's Tobit. Okay, in Matthew 12:42, we're going to come back to that. Jesus actually just calls out and says the Wisdom of Solomon, right? That's, again, the book of the Wisdom of Solomon, aka Wisdom. Matthew 16:18. Matthew, that's Maccabees. Also Maccabees. Matthew 27:43. Mark 4:5-16 through 17 is from Sirach. Luke 1:52. Mary's Magnificat addressing the mighty falling from their thrones. That's Sirach. That's Tobit. Luke 13:29. That's Baruch. Luke 21:24. That's Sirach. Luke 24. That's Maccabees. And John 1:3. That comes from where it talks about all things were made through him. The word follow. That's basically that's referencing wisdom. The Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 9, verse 1. John 3:13. That's from Baruch. John 4:8. Acts 5:12. 15:12. 2 Corinthians 12:12. Wisdom of Solomon. 5:18. Wisdom. John 6:35 through 59, Sirach. That's Maccabees, also Maccabees. John 15:6, Acts. That's also Maccabees. Acts 10:34, Romans 2:11, Galatians 2:6. That's Sirach. Acts 17:29. That's Wisdom 13:10. Romans 1:18 through 25 also is a reference to wisdom. Romans 1:20 specifically, God's existence being evident in nature follows wisdom 13:1. Honestly, let me see how many other references there are to just the wisdom books on this list. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 21. Technically 22 and 23, but we'll call it just 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. That's not technically a wisdom book. 26, 27. Okay, so we have, beyond the ones I've already, so the ones I'd already just listed off, we have another 27 direct references or allusions or extractions from these books, from the wisdom books. Again, Baruch, Sirach, aka Ecclesiasticus, and Wisdom of Solomon, aka Wisdom. So this is one of those big questions where it's and Titan has jumped ahead and done this out there. You may get to this, which I am, but thank you for asking, because it gives me a natural transition. But if the apostles quoted from these books and Jesus, why aren't they canon? Well, this goes back to they were canon. That's the problem. It wasn't until Jerome, who did the Latin Vulgate, he was the first one to call them into question because he fell in with a group of ultra Orthodox rabbis. And what happened was he said, well, they called this into question. So he's like, the Old Testament was for the Jews and the New Testament was for the Christians. So, the many Christian ecclesiastical summits they had in the 2nd and 3rd centuries and 4th centuries, sort of everyone already knew sort of what that canon was. It developed very, very early. I mean, that's one of the most historically collected editions. It's just saying all these different letters from all these different bishops and archbishops, both under Roman persecution and after, they all attest, like, look, these were the books that were there. Like, there was only really 3 different books that were up for canonization. There were some that tried to get the Gospel of Thomas in there, but basically everyone was like, we know this is a fraud. So that was never seriously considered. There were 3 and that were up for canonization, but everyone was like, yeah, these really aren't. They don't really meet the qualification. So for him, the New Testament was already was solidly addressed. But for him, he's like, well, we have the books of the Greek Septuagint. That was what the church had been using the entire time. Well, the Jewish rabbis he fell into were an ultra-Orthodox sect, and it was their claim. Now, we found out this is wrong. We have archaeological evidence that it's wrong, but this was the claim they made to him, was that their canon, the canon that they ascribed to, omitted those books because, in their words, those books were not written in Hebrew originally. Again, we have found them in Hebrew, so that was a misnomer. But he fell in with this group of ultra-Orthodox Jewish rabbis, and they said that had rejected these. I'll come back to that in a second. It's an important point. But what he did as Jerome, the guy who, again, he translates that from the Hebrew and the Greek into Latin, the Latin Vulgate. He said, look, these books, he goes, we've always considered them canon, but these, these ultra-Orthodox Jewish rabbis that I'm hanging with, they don't believe that they are canon. So I'm going to put an asterisk next to them and call them the Apocrypha, or the hidden. So he's like, I'm not saying they're not God. He's like, I'm not saying they're not canon, because history has said that they are, but I am calling them into question because these guys say that they're not canon. And so what's happened over the centuries is, once you had the Protestant Reformation, a lot of Protestant groups, it's like anything else, right? When you have that dialectic sort of, you want to make yourself stand out as different from the other group, right? It's very much setting up this us versus them. So honestly, we call it virtue signaling today. It's the thing that you do that tells people whose tribe you're in. So the Protestants, because they wanted to show their dedication to Scripture, were very quick to say, look, because and to say, hey, if there is any doubt, then we basically need to remove them, because they're like, look, if this is the canon, it needs to be above reproach, it needs to be beyond all doubt. So let's get rid of these books. Interestingly enough, though, there were different Protestant groups that had other New Testament books, right? Again, the history of the origin of the Bible it isn't like everyone makes it out like the Roman Catholic Church one day, or if you're watching the History Channel, it would sound like Constantine wakes up one day and is like, okay, I'm inventing Christianity. Quick, write a book. It's not how this worked. It's not how it happened. And so there were other Pauline letter or alleged Pauline letters that have floated around. I've read some of them. They seem very honestly, they seem like a lot of like the letters to Galatians and Corinthians, like you kind of look at them, you're like the letter to Laodiceans just seem like a shorter um version of the book to Galatia, of the letter to Galatia. So in a lot of cases, it's like, well, could they be legitimate? Maybe. Do they really add anything? Not really. So the reaction to from a lot of the Protestant groups was to sort of show because again, what was the main claim and the the raw the battle cry of the Protestants was sola scriptura, right? By scripture alone. They didn't want things like tradition to override the clear teaching of the Bible. So they said if there's any doubt about these books, then they shouldn't be considered canon. Now, the tradition was the Protestant group said, okay, they're not canon because they were called into doubt by Jerome. So, but we consider them good to read because the original denominations all basically said, hey, these are referenced in the New Testament. But again, because humans do what humans do, the Protestant church started to develop its own tradition, right? So the claim of sola scriptura became the mantra, but then there became other traditions, right? And so people start making claims like, oh, well, it's one of the arguments was Jesus never says, so it is written in the scriptures, and then quotes the Apocrypha. Okay, seems like parsing hairs, but that was the argument. So then it became the Apocrypha is not quoted in the New Testament or referenced, and so it grows and evolves. Because what has been my number one thing? Most denominations were created because people are arguing over what people said about the text. In many cases, they're arguing over what people said about what people said about what people said about the text. There is one person reading the text, they give their opinion, their thoughts on an issue, people like it, and then a bunch of people come along later and they write stuff about that. And oftentimes people didn't come along. They like this stuff up here and they write about that. And so they're arguing this stuff all up here. They're not actually going back to the text and saying, well, what does the text actually say? And just referencing their writing, saying, hey, this was this person's perspective. What does he get right? What does he get wrong? What did he not know? Instead of that conversation, it's, well, these guys, this is the argument up here. And that's what happens. It goes from, okay, well, Jerome, again, the situation I just described about Jerome, this was his situation. What should we take from that? And should we regard the opinion of the Jewish rabbis he had fallen in with, this ultra-Orthodox set? Should we consider that a legitimate source? Or should we go back to the 1st and 2nd and 3rd and 4th century churches and church leaders who all accepted these books we now call the Apocrypha, and say what did they say about them, just as a reference? But we don't do that. And so what we have are myths that evolve, and people saying things like, hey, Nathan, by the way, Nathan, I sent you that the link to the thing we were referencing today that has a lot of our work already cut out for us. So we have this whole mythology develop. And so by the time we get to most people who are going to seminaries today, they just they're reading a textbook or a book on the Apocrypha written by somebody who really didn't actually study the Apocrypha. He's all of their opinions are coming from these other groups. They're not going back and saying, well, what did the early church fathers say about them? What did, are they actually referenced in the New Testament? Why did they fall out of favor? And so and the reason for that was we start developing mythology. Like the Catholic Church added them in the Middle Ages. They didn't. Well, where does that even come from? Well, that was, again, justification for not having them. It's like, well, why does the Catholic Church have these books? Well, and I've literally sat in numerous rooms with people who made this claim. And these were people who were teachers. They said, oh, well, when asked the question, why does the Catholic Church have these extra books? And it's and the claim becomes, well, because the Catholic Church added them in the 1500s. No, they didn't. It's straight out a lie, but they genuinely believe it. They don't even realize that it's a lie. See what I mean? These traditions develop, and and that becomes your virtue signal that you're in with the group, that you're the good guy. Because look, I'm touting the company line. So yeah, so that's kind of how we got here. But as you can see, I went through all those references. The New Testament is full of allusions to these wisdom books specifically. So going back to the idea of the wisdom books, what do? Right? It's that they not only are just referenced, that they're influencing how the authors, the apostles, Jesus, how they even address situations and topics, right? It's not just that they are that these were just popular books at the time. They were literally providing the framework for what they were saying. Again, okay, so let's go back to something I mentioned last week. Tobit, right? In again, not a wisdom book, but it sets the tone more directly. In Tobit, Tobit says, "Do not do unto others that which you would not have done unto you." Jesus, in the Golden Rule, he's taking that from Tobit. He reverses it from a negative to a positive, though, saying, "Do unto others what you would have done unto you." Right? It's a proactive version of it. He's taking it one step beyond. He's like, it's not sufficient to just not do evil things, but rather you need to do good things to other people, right? That you need to care for other people. It's a proactive statement. But do you think that the authors or the listeners and the people who were writing this down didn't realize what he was saying and referencing? It is, they got it. Again, when we went through the Beatitudes, the fact that he places at the end of like the Beatitudes that comment about, I did not come to destroy the law. Like, it was obvious to, and it's one of those things I missed. Like, it was obvious to them what he was doing. He was standing on a high place. His Beatitudes break out very much like the Ten Commandments. You're like, okay, they get what he's saying. They get what he's doing. We miss it because we're not of that culture. We don't think like that. These wisdom books are literally setting the foundation for how they even talk about things. So it's not just that these wisdom books are important because they have wisdom in them, though that's true. And we can all look at our culture today. We need wisdom, right? There's one thing our culture lacks. It's wisdom. Anyway, but it's that they are forming, these books help form the foundation upon which these authors and the apostles and Jesus think, how they are addressing these topics, right? Well, if you want to understand what they're saying and how and why, don't we need to understand the mindset? Don't we need to understand the background of how these things got there? Yeah, we do. Well, that's what these books are. These wisdom books. Again, Baruch, Sirach, aka Ecclesiasticus, and the Wisdom of Solomon, aka Wisdom. These books tell that story. It's sort of it's a very integral part of that narrative of what they are saying. And again, when Jesus calls himself the Son of Man, he's not referencing Daniel, he's referencing the book of Enoch. And that matters. It matters a lot, because people say, oh, he never claimed to be the Messiah. Yeah, he did. In fact, if he hadn't, they wouldn't have nailed him to the cross. He did it all the time. We miss it because he doesn't come out and use the words. He uses these other things because he's saying, this is me. This is what these scriptures are saying. Again, when he quotes Isaiah, when he reads from the scroll of Isaiah, and he says, these words are fulfilled in your hearing, they all freaked out because they knew what he was saying. We miss these things. Again, why does Peter in his epistles, when he talks about again Christ going down to hell, right, to the spirits and to the spirits in Tartarus, like why is he talking about that? Well, when you understand the book of Enoch, you understand what he's saying. He is establishing him, again, going back to that whole son of man motif, which is from the book of Enoch. When you understand these, you start getting with the real nuance of a lot of these phrases and a lot of these sayings and a lot of these teachings, right? And that's why the Apocrypha matters. That's why they were part of that's why they were a part of the Christian canon without question for the first 6 centuries, and literally have always been a part of the Christian canon until the last 140 years. Every English Bible printed until the 1860s had the Apocrypha in it. The authors of the Constitution, our founding fathers, they all read it, and they talked about it. The apocryphal works are all over artwork. It's always been an important part of our understanding of the Bible. Even though a lot of people, again, the Protestant community didn't believe them to be canon, they're like, but we need to know these stories. And they understood them where they fell in what they were saying and what they were telling to the New Testament authors. But in the 1860s, they're removed. And then came a push, again, the virtue signal, to reject them. And in rejecting them, I think we've lost a lot of the understanding of what was being said and why. Those books were there to help us understand, again, the entire Old Testament's there, so we understand what Jesus was actually doing. We miss that so often. Well, the Apocrypha also helps in that. And I can't help but notice, and I've said this before, yes, again, the Old Testament that we have is sufficient, but it doesn't mean it's the whole story. So much of the Apocrypha is about living in a world where the culture is against you. It's about being a follower of God in a culture that is looks at God and his teachings and rejects it and is actively hostile to it. I cannot help but think, hey, Overbelt and Ruger, it's okay. It's not, there's no one's going to wrap your knuckles with a ruler for being late here. It's one of the reasons we do it on YouTube, is so that you can come and watch it at any time. Love y'all. When those books were removed, we seem to have lost our way, because we lost the way as a culture. Now, is that the only reason? No, I don't think it is. But is it one of those threads that gets pulled at that allows us to fall away? Maybe it is. Maybe it was a much bigger piece than we realized. Maybe it should have always been there. We should have, even if we wanted to say, okay, it's not canon, fine, but it should still be read and understood. We should understand what it is telling and how it influenced Jesus and his apostles and Paul and all of his disciples. How did it frame what they were saying? What were the lessons being taught? Why did the early church consider, it's like, if you want to say the early church got it wrong, fine, but why did they, at least, why was there a reason for them to think that was the case? It meant that these books taught something important, something valuable that they thought we needed to know. So, again, if you don't have it already in your Bible, again, most of us have Protestant Bibles. You can go get it for real cheap online. I mean, basically anywhere. They're worth the read, and we need to start to integrate these things so we can better understand what Jesus is saying, what the apostles are saying. I have this feeling in my head that out there is like the English Standard Bible seems to be the best version for them from the modern reader that I found. But I wonder if there's somewhere where there is a version waiting to happen where they harmonize the Hebrew, like, because sometimes, because this is the weird thing, like in the New Testament, both Jesus and the apostles did in their writings do it the same way. Sometimes they're quoting the Hebrew version, sometimes they quote the Greek version. Like they do both. And I think it's because they were trying to drive home a point. They're pointing to things. Oftentimes the reason we miss the one of the reasons that I think we miss some of the allusions to the Old Testament and the Apocrypha, things like that, is we're translating the Hebrew from Hebrew into English, and then the New Testament's in Greek. We're translating that to English, not realizing we kind of need to restructure them so that we can see the connections. Titan says, it seems the Apocrypha along with the Book of Enoch are the lines that connect the dots. Remove the lines, you don't have the connective history. Yeah, I think that's a valid way of saying it. It's they are the connective tissue. They hold everything together. They join everything together in a lot of ways. And Titan, I am not a translator. I'm not about to pull that. Chad says, there's no telling what they originally said thousands of years ago. Much info gets lost in multiple translations and versions. Chad, yeah, that's where you're 100% wrong. We know what was written. Like this is one of those things we've talked about a lot. I've done a whole thing on how we got the Bible. There's this myth that it's like, there's one the original authors write it down and then someone comes along, copies it, and they destroy that original. And then it gets translated from Hebrew into Greek. And then all the Hebrew versions get removed. And then we're only reading from the Greek. And then it gets translated into Latin. And then the Greek versions are destroyed. That's not how that worked. Even Bart Ehrman, not a Christian, admits, let me phrase this. When he's not speaking in front of a paying group, when he has to speak to academics and he can't lie, he admits we know with like 99% accuracy what has been written in all these books. Like the text is the text. We know that. We have fragments and we have whole books going back thousands of years. We have fragments going back to the first century. We have we can find other references, external references in letters and communications and tablets. We know what was written. There are cultural contexts that have been lost, but archaeologists have done a great job of putting that together. But we've got Matthew in the original Hebrew now. We have that. We can judge it against the Greek version. We have to remember, we don't have the original for the New Testament from the New Testament books, but we have fragments and copies going back to the 1st and 2nd century. We may not have the originals, but we may have copies of copies of copies. We may have copies of copies. Some of these may just be direct copies. And so we know what was said. Like this is one of those fallacious arguments that's thrown out a lot, where it's like, oh, what's been translated so often. It's like, that's lazy thinking. People have been working at this since the beginning to preserve this stuff. In fact, we can often see when people have made deliberate changes to the text, and it gets called out pretty quick. And we have to remember, it's not just the copies of the Bible. You could reconstruct the vast majority of the New Testament from the letters of the first early church fathers from the first 2 or 3 centuries. They absolutely were very diligent in making quotations. And so we can compare those letters to the fragments and the different copies that have been found. And they all match up. Same thing with the Old Testament. The Old Testament has numerous accounts, again, from different nations written in different languages, and they all cross connect. They match. The question isn't what was said. The question often is, the deficiencies are cultural. We don't understand the idioms. We often in the modern day don't do the hard work of understanding the cultural context. Secondly, oftentimes we in the modern world are working from a modern translation in English instead of going back to the original. So we miss the nuance. We know what was said, but we miss those cultural contexts. So the text itself isn't the issue; it's our cultural understanding. But that is being resolved. Again, we have a lot of. Um, what about the Vatican? I mean, again, one of the great. The Vatican didn't go through and remove. They would have to have gone back and rewritten every book ever written in every country. And let me list them: China, Egypt, going all Ethiopia. They would have to go through. I mean, let's just assume they controlled Egypt. You have Turkey, Iran, Iraq. I mean, we find these things everywhere. Like, that's the thing. The Vatican can't just rewrite everything. We can go back before the Vatican existed. We can go back before the Catholic Church existed. And here's the thing: the Catholic Church, you know, uh, Nathan mentioned, the Catholic Church that called them canon in three. That wasn't even the Catholic Church yet. Like, the Catholic Church doesn't really evolve until much, much later. The Catholic Church we would know doesn't evolve until much later. The simple fact of the matter is, no one really there isn't the level of control people think. And the problem is, even the Vatican, which again, I got my problems with. I'll sit here and say, I'll talk all day about the crap that they pulled. However, they preserved a lot of this stuff too. They didn't go back through and change anything. We can see that they didn't change it. They manipulated it. They didn't manipulate the text. They just manipulated what they told the people through papal bulls and edicts and tradition. But they didn't change the text because they kind of couldn't. Their power came on the idea of saying, we're continuing this tradition, right? They were built on something, so they couldn't get rid of it. Sort of today, like how our modern government is destroying our rights, but they're not going back and changing the Constitution, changing the actual text of the Constitution. They're just finding ways to ignore it, right? That's all it is. It's the same thing. So again, we have a Yes. Thank you, Nathan. Yeah. Again, the word Catholic just means universal. So again, what we would consider the Catholic Church doesn't evolve till later. But yeah, they called themselves the Catholic Church because they meant the universal church, the church of all Christians, the body of Christ. So the thing is, we have the text. We know what the text says. What's often lost is the cultural nuance. Again, I use this analogy all the time. So forgive me if you've heard it 100 times. It's not a mistranslation. It's lost in translation. My favorite example of this is there's an anime called Kill Alla Kill. I'm not recommending it. I'm just using it as a reference. So the thing is, the English name Kill Alla Kill just seems weird, but it was a direct translation. It's like, those what the words are. What we miss is that in the Japanese kanji, it's actually a double. It's a pun, because the word, even though it means kill and kill, they're homonyms. So a better version or a better translation would be dressed to kill, because that's the pun. Because the anime is about people with superpowered clothing. It's a weird show. But the translation, again, if you were going for trying to translate the idiom, right, and get that nuance, would have been something like dressed to kill. Well, we often don't see that connection because we're reading someone who's trying to translate the text accurately, but there's cultural nuance mixed. I mentioned this when I talk about Leviathan in Isaiah. The reason he's using Leviathan as a stand-in for both Tiamat, which is a stand-in for Satan, in the book of Isaiah. Well, there's reasons for that if you understood the cultural context, what Tiamat means, how, the glistening one. He's connecting that to the serpent from the Garden of Eden. And then for the rest of the book, that's why he calls the cherubim seraphim. He's not talking about a different sect of angels or a different hierarchy of angels. He's using a different name because he's trying to, so that the readers would say, oh, Satan was one of the cherubim. That's why you're calling them seraphim, because you're connecting this serpentine language. In Isaiah, he talks about the fall of Babylon. He talks about Tanin being in Babylon. Well, a lot, in the 1611 actually translated is dragons. And a lot of people have said, oh, that means it's referencing dragons. No, the problem is the 1611 actually it's a great translation. It wasn't wrong to translate it as dragon. The problem is we miss what's being said. Leviathan is the head of all the sea monsters. Tanin is a sea monster. So if Leviathan is a stand-in for Satan, and the serpentine language is telling you that's supernatural beings, then a dragon, a water monster, being inland, is telling us these are demons, which is what the Septuagint actually does. It actually translates it as demons. It doesn't do the whole dragon. It skips that, because the people who were translating it at the time understood that doesn't, if you were to translate it directly, you miss the mark. It's what's considered a dynamic translation. So it is one of those things where we often do miss those cultural contexts, but we have archaeologists and Semiticists doing a great job of going through these other ancient associated texts, like the Sumerian and the Babylonian text and the Egyptian text, and saying, hey, this is a reference to this. There was a cultural communication happening. In fact, one of my favorite things is that a lot of these linguists have done is when you read the first five, the Pentateuch, particularly when you start talking about Moses and the journey out of Egypt, there is a lot of Egyptian cognates, meaning the older stories, right? The Genesis on that, there's a lot of Ugaritic and Akkadian being used, older references. But when you get into the story where everyone's in Egypt, and when they're dealing with Egypt, you get a lot of Egyptian, meaning these are words borrowed from that language, in the same way that we borrow words from French, right? French and English, better idea, because English is basically three different languages in a coat acting like one language. Tamale or tortilla, those are not English words, but we have them in English. They are loaned words from Spanish, right? There are, the story, when you get into the story where the Jews are in Egypt, there is a ton of these borrowed Egyptian words and concepts and phraseology, which means the people who wrote it and who wrote those sections were not just familiar with Egyptian, they had that kind of communication, in the same way that as a Texan, I'm going to look at Mahia, right? I'm not going to pronounce it Mexia. It's Mahia. I understand what's happening. When people talk about Bexar, on nationals, they'll say Bexar County. It's Bear County. Now, here's the thing: it's technically Bahar. That's the Spanish, but we've transliterated it. We've anglicized it into Bear. But I see that because I'm a Texan. I understand what's happening there. It's part of my culture. Well, in the same way, these authors had such close contact with Egyptian culture that they were using borrowed words and concepts in their writing. So we've been able to use this to go back and say, yeah, look, whatever you can disagree with the teachings of these documents, but the documents are the documents. That we do have the documents, and there's good reason to date them to the period that they claim to come from, all of them. The only one that we can question some of them. There's as far as, well, were they written later, or were they written in an earlier period, and then people come back, and when they're putting it together, like there was no holy stapler where they just took all the writings and went click, and now we have a book, right? They would translate them, and they would themselves, when they were coming, to say, okay, well, this is the old name for this city. Let's use a modern name. So we do see those kinds of things happening, but the text is still the text. So we're good on that. On that note, I will see y'all. So I'm going to do a recording with, who am I recording with this afternoon? I think it'll go up later. So I'll be recording. Darn it, I just forgot his name. Hold on, give me 2 seconds. After this, I will be recording with Where'd he go? Ryan Edwards. Sorry, Ryan. I had another Ryan in my head. I'm like, I know that's not the person I'm talking about. So yeah, I'll be recording with Ryan Edwards here in a minute. And then I will see y'all on Monday. And Tuesday, we have the second episode of Weird Library. We're going to be talking about Ken Gerhardt's book. It's going to be a lot of fun. So, well, we're working on it. So we're building. And like I said, I'm going to be doing some more stuff with sirupapers. It's going to be different from what we're seeing on the regular weekly shows. So it'll be a lot of fun. Guys, I'm going to let you have the rest of your Sunday back or whatever day you're watching this on. Y'all have a great day. And I think next week we'll be talking about the Maccabees. So we'll do both. We'll do all the Maccabees at one time because that's, their history book. So it'll be real easy to do. And we will do, again, next week we'll start with communion being every week. So it'll be good to go. Y'all have a good one. Bye.